Alright, people, alright. Inna alhamdulillahi wa kafah, wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulih al-Mustafa wa ala ibadi alladhina irtada wa man bihudahu mihtada wa bi athari ahli al-Madinah iqtafa wa ba'd. People, fassalamu Allahi ala al-qawm, ahlan wa sahlan bikum. First and foremost, let me just see that that people can hear what I'm saying. That we are live. Just want to check that. People, if you can hear it loud and clear, cool. Just give me a shout. Right. Firstly, afwan للتأخير. I know some of you have been waiting, but we have an esteemed guest with us tonight from across the pond, people. In this era of COVID-19, let me just bring up right before you there, you see the esteemed guest, Ustadha Tahera Ahmed, who is one of the leading, amongst the leading female qurra throughout the world. She is an Islamic scholar, a tilawa specialist, somebody who does a lot of chaplain work, and we'll speak a bit about that, and a key activist on the Muslim scene, especially within the United States, and a role model for many who are out there. I'm just bringing in our... Alright, ahlan wa sahlan, Ustadha. Assalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh. Right,
Wa alaikum assalam.
Right, so Ustadha, first of all, shukran for taking out the time. I know a lot of people have been kind of waiting. Let me just see somebody. Right, okay, sound is okay, cool. Ustadha, right, just a bit of not to kind of put you on the spot, but a bit of some more details on your background, the work you're involved in, for a lot of people who may not be familiar with the US scene or the chaplaincy work there or the activism. So yeah, so what exactly is it? Is there any work involved?
Yeah, Bismillah wa salatu wa salamu ala rasulillah. Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa ala Sayyidina Muhammad wa barik wa sallim. Jazakallah khair, Mufti Sahab, for inviting me. I think the last time that we met was about 2 years ago in Birmingham. We still kept the halal gap, we were still following the COVID rules since back then. And yeah, when you invited me to join this MindTrap of yours, I was in the beginning. I was like, oh man, my feminist friends were like, don't get on his show,
We need to get some of them on it.
Yeah, actually, I'm curious because I'm actually trying to understand what your definition of feminism is. But yeah. Maybe we'll get some more people live on the show with us. But yeah, one of them was like, dude, don't tell me you're just getting on the show because you like the Brit accent. I was like, I love the English accent. So if I could hear it again. Yeah, alhamdulillah. So yeah, and as long as, the understanding that I have of what it means to be a chaplain actually comes from, excuse me, alhamdulillah. I was about to cough, but if you cough and sneeze in this time, everybody's like, I'm gonna lose your live people right away.
We're gonna immediately just blank out the screen. I'm gonna have to spray sanitizer all across my monitor here.
So the word chaplain actually comes from Latin, and it means to cloak someone in their time of need. Okay. And so while it has its roots in Christianography, or the idea that it's rooted in Christian theology, over time, I think in the vernacular that we're in, the word or the term has been used as a title for spiritual caregivers or pastoral caregivers here in the United States. But as you know, the UK actually was the first to start this idea of Muslim chaplaincy way before, Muslims did here in the United States. It actually started in the military here so that Muslim would be able to do the funeral services for Muslim soldiers. But it then spread to, the prison systems, the hospitals, and now it's on university campuses and all of the Ivy colleges or universities in the United States. This includes Harvard, Stanford, Duke, Yale, Northwestern, where I work, all of the premier institutions. Don't worry.
We'll resume after the break with the janaza people in absentia. No,
You know what
shafakillah. So
my mom my mom actually made some dal.
some spicy dal, Hyderabadi. Those of you that don't know, Ustadha is also from Hyderabad. We did have a guest on here earlier on, Dr. Majid, who was from Hyderabad, and here is another. They refer, aka Hydros, as the slang term goes, and very famous for their biryani, as I hear, Hyderabadi Biryani, and so it was some Hyderabadi spicy salan going down, Ustadha. Was that what? Is that the cause of COVID?
Actually, what it is that they do something called tadka, and it's like you fry the dal. I think all the Hyderabadis know what I'm talking about. And so when it steams, it actually causes a lot of the air to have like that interesting smell of the onion. But anyway, the point I'm trying to make is
guys,
people,
this is how we're gonna learn the secret recipe behind the Hyderabadi cooking. It's actually quite world renowned, apparently, isn't it? Hyderabadi food, or is that just?
Well, Hyderabadi biryani is supposed to be, either that or I'm just getting nazar, from some of your people who are out there. Stop giving me nazar, people. That's what this is about.
You haters. You people can't take it, can you? That there's a female qari'ah. That's the problem.
So basically, what a chaplain really does is primarily provides pastoral care, and is really there for someone in their time of need. We call it the ministry of presence. We have chaplains that are on call. Someone really needs crisis support or trauma support. But really, it's an opportunity for young people, especially on college campuses, to be able to talk to someone about God. I mean, like if you go to counseling centers, right, unless the client themselves wants to talk about the idea of faith or God, that's not necessarily part of the healing process. Whereas with chaplains, we are a fully confidential space. We are actually one of the few places, at least in the state of Illinois, that you can come and discuss things, and really we take it to our grave, so to speak, right? So it's fully confidential, and it's an opportunity to grow in your own spiritual understanding of meaning and purpose. So yeah, basically what I do for a living is I listen to people complain about their lives. No, I'm just kidding.
Right, we're just gonna bring in the dean of Northwestern. Hello, sir. Right, given the current climate, Ustadha, I mean, have a lot more people reached out, or not necessarily? Has it remained stagnant? What is the current? I know everything must be virtual and from home, but what's the feel? Is it the same? Is there a lack of because everybody's at home, or is there more? Or
yeah, that's an excellent question. Subhanallah, there are about Gallup estimates between 8 to 11 million Muslims in the United States, right? So think about the UK, we're talking about like 2 million. To even if you say conservative numbers of about 9 to 10 million Muslims in the United States, keep in mind we are like 50 times bigger than you all, which is always like something kind of crazy. I think it's interesting because when I was there, I remember in 2 seconds you're in another country, really, right? But a lot of the conversations here, I think, have been about wellness during this time, because if you think about it, this is collective grief. Literally, people are going through the 7 stages of grief that, when someone passes away or when someone experiences loss. So we are now experiencing, this is why they say some people are in the beginning were in shock, like as in terms of the 7 stages of grief. If you think about what those are, some people were in denial. Like you had Americans who were like, I'm not going to cancel my spring break. You know, if I get corona, I get corona. And I'm sure you saw footage of that. And so I think part of it is that different people at different point have accepted the reality and are now trying to like figure out, okay, how do I, you know, try to figure out how to be with my family, for example, right? And some people are like, yeah, just stay home. And for others, it's not that easy, right? Like people are like, I don't want to go live with mom and dad, or I don't, maybe some people don't even have that luxury or that privilege. So the United States, I think, is unique in the sense that because there's already, mashallah, many Muslim institutions, we have been able to kind of really provide instant support and assistance. I think some of the amazing work that's being done by several institutions, particularly those who are providing frontline support.
Like
so
medical support, are we talking about as well, or are we talking about just spiritual?
Yeah, both. So I think some organizations are helping with food, with water, with shelter. Others are really thinking about how do we help with, you know, the mental health piece. Others are thinking about, you know what, how can we come together and really provide the elderly assistance, you know. So all of that is happening. Alhamdulillah.
I see. Okay.
And the resilience of people is amazing.
All right. Okay. I mean, there is definitely a perception and an understanding here that American Muslims, by and large, are, you know, much better structured and much more part and parcel of the American society, in contrast to British Muslims. Do you feel that as well, or?
In what sense? In what sense? What do you think in terms of
the how at ease they are in where they live, how in harmony and sync they are with their own societies, how the widespread access of professional Muslims, the kind of structures, even the way you have this kind of chaplaincy. It's not that they don't have chaplaincies in the UK, they do, but I'm just saying even other kind of activisms, and there's an impression and a perception here that the Americans seem to be much more involved with the wider momentum of America and more entangled in the fabric of American society than British Muslims, who sometimes are a lot more insular. They're kind of like, you know, you've got a huge pockets of communities here, but they're not so. I mean, there are some people, obviously, you will get people in Parliament and you'll get people like this, but they, by and large, seem to be very an insular community here. I mean, I don't know if you've noticed that. Have you noticed that, or is that just our perception here?
Yeah, so like, I've been through the UK probably in the last few years a dozen times. So I've had a pretty good exposure to different communities. And one of the interesting things about the UK is that you all seem to have a lot of different tribes in different places, and everybody pretty much sticks to their own masjid.
Yeah.
Which, you know, is not like unique just to the UK. But one thing I think American Muslims have that's, you know, and research suggests this as well, that we have, you know, group of professionals who came here post-Gulf War and then were able to have, you know, jobs that allowed them to be in a socioeconomic advantage place, and then they were able to build institutions and really have the capacity to engage at a civic level in ways that perhaps, you know, is still something that's in process, you know, overseas or over in the UK specifically. I'm not sure.
Would you feel a part of that is to do with the migrant community that first came over?
Absolutely. So, for example, you have third-generation American Muslims who were born and raised here, right, who in some ways are absolutely, you know, at their root Muslim. They recognize that being a Muslim is part and parcel of their identity, and they will challenge American policy, but they will still say, yeah, I'm an American Muslim, right? and they're comfortable doing that. Whereas my travels in the UK, and again, this is all anecdotal, so folks want to disagree, that's totally fine. But my experience has been that there was a lot of like ghettoization of like Muslims in the UK. So you had little pockets of different kinds of Muslims. And on one hand, they would go to college and they'd have a female professor, but and she was wearing a mini skirt, but then they'll come out and they'll be like, everything else has to be gender segregated for them. And so the kind of polarity there, or just kind of the paradox even, was really interesting for me, that this insistence to think about, and what I call hard Islam versus soft Islam, right? Which is something I've always wanted to kind of discuss with you, which is this idea that it's the hard Islam, the stricter you are, the more, somehow pristine it is, or somehow it's like the better version of Islam. Whereas if somebody is taking a position that may actually seem soft, but is actually what is the maslaha, or the reform of what needs to happen. And I don't know, maybe you'll disagree with me, but I think what I've seen in the UK is, hard Islam and soft Islam. Like either you follow this or you follow that, and like nothing in between,
I mean, it's easier to convince people that something easy is a consequence of following desires. That kind of is, people are easily persuaded by that notion. Like if I said to you, do you want to pray 100 nafal, or like let's say 100 raka'at, or do you just want to pray 2? And or do you want to pray none? You don't even have to pray this. Now it's easy to sell that position off as those are just deviants, or those are, even if you don't say deviants, but those are people who are just inclining towards their desires, which are anti-worship. Because people by nature are not inclined towards devotion and worship. I mean, devotion maybe, but not worship. So I totally agree with you. I know this is a topic you've raised, and I agree that there is this division between this kind of Puritanism, this fundamentalism, which is passed off as this is true Islam because it has hardship in it. And hardship seems to be the validating factor for, let's say, the audience, the spectators, to make that judgment. Because they say to them, you decide. Which is the true sunnah? Is it, for example, him sitting there in a t-shirt, in this day and age, he's wearing jeans, he's doing this? Or is it, look, I'm struggling, I've got this really long beard, I'm having to go against the current culture, I'm being treated like an outsider, and I'm putting up with this. And at this stage, it becomes like an appeal to emotion. And it easily wins an argument with, I think, the laity. That's why I think common people easily buy that argument that, they must be upon something, because suffering somehow equates to a validation that it's correct. I mean, that's my thoughts. What would you feel? Would you feel that, or is that something?
Yeah, I mean, I think most people understand that, some of it has to do with like their understanding of what is the purpose of religion, right? Is it to make things hard for you, or is it to make things easy for you? And Rasulullah said in a hadith, and this better, that ad-dinu yusr, right? That religion is supposed to be something that's easy. Now, it doesn't mean that if we're supposed to somehow pray from 5 times, somebody says go pray 2 times, or I don't have to make wudu anymore. I'm not saying that either. But this idea that hard Islam, or like the harder things are. So, an example of this is like when this whole thing started with COVID-19, everyone was like, oh, well, I'm still going to go to the masjid, and, people arguing. I had, one person tell me, I'm a woman, I can't make that decision. It's not fard on me anyway, so I could keep my mouth, shut about that, and I have this responsibility, right? Like in a larger scale, to think about whether I sit on the board of a masjid, or whether I'm, running aspects of ritual life for an institution.
When they're saying you're a woman, that's, it's not an obligation on you, is that being a part of the board, or is that a separate issue, that you're a woman, that's not an obligation? What is that about?
So so I was told that you should keep away from this conversation of whether or not Friday prayers is going to be held. And this is not, I'm not talking about, any particular, university. I'm talking generally speaking of institutions in Chicago, right? Okay. That you should keep, yourself away from this conversation because Jummah is not fard on you. So therefore you need to keep, your mouth shut pretty much. And I disagree with that because part of, even if something is not fard, obviously doesn't, mean that a person can't have a conversation about the fact that all these men who will go and then they may be asymptomatic, but then give it to their wives or their children, or right, like that's part of the conversation. But I think what I found interesting is the men who were insisting to keep the masajid open. And again, like my heart hurt, right? Like with this idea that the masajid are closed, but the idea that somehow you are now a weaker Muslim because you have chose this option to pray at home, I think that's what I'm talking about, right? And this idea of like, where's the maslahah and where's this understanding? You would find that in every other aspect of your life. But when it comes to deen, yeah, I think you're right. I think some people look at it as, in order to, be a better Muslim, you have to find the stricter version and stick to that because that's more pristine. Even if I can't do it, I'm going to, at least this is how some people think, I think.
No, and out of curiosity, and just to be clear, you were on the other end of arguing that masjids should be shut.
Absolutely.
What was the outcome of that? I mean, you were told that, look, listen, you don't even really belong in this as part of this discourse. How did that end? That as far with you, I mean, were you then, or did you carry on, or what happened? Or did you just come back with a machine gun? being America, typical American behavior.
Oh my! You need to delete that part out, bro. Seriously. By the way, I'm an archer, so I don't use machine guns.
The Hunger Games.
I go Sinna style.
You came back and
right. Yeah. I have a nickname for all anyone who's following me right now. They know it's Sherni. That means lioness. Yeah. So, of course not. I mean, I think this is a decision that's not going to just impact men. I mean, we are collective. So of course I didn't, back off. I think continue to raise awareness. And alhamdulillah, now I think in the United States, there's a very different idea around this. I mean, most people are kind of now recognizing that we are supposed to have the most cases of COVID-19 right now. So I think people are taking it a little bit more seriously, but you'd be surprised. I mean, I was on my walk today. I got to tell you all this, seriously. I was on my walk today, right? My Hyderabadi rant walk.
Yeah. And those of you that don't know, that Ustadha has a Hyderabadi rant. It's on her Insta stories usually. She's going and she's having a rant in Hyderabadi, in the dialect people, so you got to catch that as well. But
yeah, and I've been doing it a little bit for my Pakistani friends too, because, they
वो बेचारे ऐसे ही रहते हैं, चलो उनके लिए भी कुछ होना चाहिए.
उनके लिए होना चाहिए, वो बात कहते हैं कि ये कराची का एक्सेंट होना है, हमें लाहौर का होना है, मुझे पंजाबी भी नहीं आती, तो फिर क्या करेंगे? Anyway, so yeah, I'm walking and everywhere there's signs that say like stay home people, right? Mm-hmm. But, of course our Desi and Pakistani people, we're always like, kind of a little bit behind to understand these things. There's a house and there's like 15 kids running around in the backyard. The ball comes my way and I'm like, oh, I don't even want to touch this ball, give it back to the kid. Anyway, he comes, he gets it. And I'm like, are you guys all siblings? Like, are you all like brothers and sisters? And he's like, no, this is my friend from school and this is the kid from across the street and this is my cousin from so-and-so. I'm like, wow. So then, there somebody who's like a lady, wearing her Desi clothes or Pakistani clothes comes out and she's like, stop talking to strangers to them. And I'm like, no, assalamu alaikum, I'm no stranger, And she's like, wa alaikum assalam. And I'm like, ye sab aapke bache? Like, are all 15 of these your kids?
You go, shabash. I just wanted to nominate you for the Woman of the Decade award.
Well, and
you've contributed to this ummah quantitatively.
Well, she's basically telling me that she knows what I was trying to do, right? She knows that I'm asking her, like, what's going on over here? Why is there like a little mini secret block party happening? Because that happens all across the United States, right? And she's like, "Ji, ye pure 15 bache mere." And I'm like, wow, mashallah. And then I'm like, is really not a good idea. And she's like, "Aap kaun hai bolne wale?" You know, she's like, "Get off my property." I'm like, "Main to sidewalk pe hu, you know, I'm on the sidewalk. It's okay, I can say what I want to." And yeah, subhanallah. And she finally, you know, she's like, "Aap hai kaun hai aap bolne wale?" I'm like, "I'm your neighbor." And she's like, "I've never seen you." I'm like, "Yeah, because, you know, for 15 years, if these are all your kids, you know, you've been very busy. You never took a walk around the block, lady, you know, subhanallah." And he's like, "Get off my property, I'm going to call." I'm like, "Theek hai, aap call kariye, jisko bhi call karna hai, you know, call whoever you want to call." But anyway, the point is, you know, some people are still not taking it seriously, right? And I think part of, you and I are discussing more of this idea of like, what could be, you know, one of these reasons. And I think some of it has to do with people understanding the purpose and meaning of how religion is supposed to function in our lives, right? So for many of us, I think we compartmentalize religion. And it's like, even if we're not able to follow the very pristine version of it, there's this idea that there's an ideal that we have. And I don't think there's anything wrong with an idea of having what I would call, and actually I want to give a shout out to Ustadha Tahera Ahmed, because I think originally this is his idea, that there should be
Ustadha Amir
Ahmed. You know, you're a fellow Maliki, actually. He's your brother, right?
He needs to reach out to me to get on this.
Yeah, absolutely. So, you know, Ustadha Tahera Ahmed and I have been talking about this for some time, and it's this idea that when it comes to hard or soft Islam, we need to think about what is the actual maslaha in the issue that you're dealing with, right? And for your own personal life, you should have what we call a private maximum. That in your private life, you try to do the best that you can when it comes to the rituals, when it comes to following the sunnah of Rasulullah sallallahu alaihi wasallam. But in the public sphere or the public space, there should be a public minimum, like a least common denominator that everybody could at least associate at, right? Because if you keep raising the bar real high for people, like no one's really going to ever, like if you keep making it higher and higher, you're not going to be able to have like a normalized version of Islam, right? And I also think that, you know, people who, and I shared this with you before, like ultra orthodoxy breeds perversion, I think, you know, like when you start to practice Islam in its extreme form, it actually, I've experienced this, you know, from the madrasas that I've been around, and I know you wanted to talk to me a little bit about that too. Yeah. But this idea that, you know,
I mean, just expanding on that for people who don't fully, you know, you termed it as, you phrased it as ultra orthodoxy breeds perversion. What do you mean by that, and any examples coming to mind, just for people to understand what is it that you're people, because somebody may say, what is exactly, how does that manifest as some kind of perversion?
So again, this is my opinion, this is my experience.
Sure.
I don't know if anyone who's done a PhD on this, or at least maybe there's some research which suggests this, but my experience has been that, you know, sometimes when someone projects that they are uber conservative or uber religious, and so my experience of the madrasa that I went to actually was here in West Chicago, and while my teachers were amazing, alhamdulillah, and the idea of traditional knowledge and traditional seeking, I am absolutely for it. I think it's has an, you know, mashallah, phenomenal impact on my own personal life.
Did you go there of your own choice, or your family put you in, and how old were you approximately at the time?
That's a good question. So I actually went because 9/11 had occurred in my senior year of high school. Okay. And I was, you know, I mean, I don't know if you know this about me. Basically, I was an all-state athlete. Okay. I know you like to build muscle, but like, bro, I could totally kill you in basketball.
Look at that. I believe that people. Ustadha is an absolute sports athlete. I've seen some of those performances on the clips. Absolutely doing it, and not just basketball, isn't it? Also, is it MMA or wrestling or something like that as well, isn't it? Or no?
I mean, I got some basic self-defense training. You know, I'm not there yet, but I've been, you know, talking to you know, I don't know if you know Brother Eddie. I want to give him a shout out. He runs the Dean Show. He actually has the Redzovic gym, which is considered a top MMA gym right here in Chicago. So it's a martial arts kind of space. And so inshallah, hopefully when the COVID thing is over, learn some of that as well. But anyway, I basically was an athlete. And, to be honest, like the same referee who had actually known me quite well and, would encourage me and tell me there's recruiters out here to watch you play, stopped the basketball game at 1:34 left into the fourth quarter. And I don't know if the UK people watch basketball a whole lot, but basically it's like the end of the game, y'all. And he basically told me that, number 33, you're in violation of the IHSA Illinois rules for uniform code and conduct, which means he was telling me I can't wear my hijab, I can't wear my sweats, right?
Right, okay.
So that experience, right, had a huge impact on me because as I was going to the locker room, a parent walked down and he was like, number 33, it's the shame they let you back in, because they did let me back into the game because my coach argued for me. But the locker rooms were silent. Everybody was silent. And then my honors English teacher asked me one day to stay after class. And he said, Tahera, if you need to talk to someone, I'm here for you. And I thought, oh, finally, alhamdulillah, someone wants to be there for me. And he said, Tahera, if your father beats you at home or if he forces you to wear that thing on your head, there are counselors here, there are social workers here. We're all here for you. So then he pulled out this picture he took, and it was of the Taliban. And if you remember, of the Taliban.
Okay, I'm not sure.
The Afghanistan Taliban.
Oh, the Taliban. Right, sorry, right. Okay, came across as, okay. I thought you said something like Taliban, so I didn't understand what, right, okay, yes, carry on.
So, and it was an image of a woman wearing burqa, right? Mm-hmm. And he was hitting her with a stick. And he basically put that in front of me, right? And so imagine I'm 16, 17 years old, and the juxtapositioning of that, right, is like he's basically in an indirect way asking me to explain that, right? And he's like, I read the Quran. It says, in chapter 4, verse 34, you can beat your wife. Like he was putting it on me, right? Like he was just like, here you go, here, answer this. So I realized that I needed some answers, and I wanted to get those answers from the people who looked in, at least in image, right? Like, with the kind of the
Islamic
Orthodox, right? The Orthodox version, so to speak, even though we don't have that kind of in Islam, like we don't have these labels yet. So that's what I did. I went to a madrasa and I was about 17 years old. I spent from 17 to about 22. So about 6 years of my life, give or take. And, that was an interesting experience. I mean, when I say ultra-Orthodoxy breeds perversion, later they found out that the person who was, kind of running that institute had been, unfortunately, he was actually doing things that he really shouldn't have. And I personally didn't know about it when I was there. But the fact that...
And this became a bit of a thing as well later on, didn't it? Yeah.
Yeah, it was huge, and I actually left that institute before all of this happened. But it was very sad that at this idea constantly, like I would be told I can't go give public speeches, I should wear niqab, all of that, right? And I absolutely adore my friends who wear niqab. I think it's beautiful. I mean, right now, hey, I'm wearing niqab when I go out for COVID, right?
This is part of God's plan. Not.
Yeah. I mean, those women who choose to do it, I think it's absolutely amazing and awesome. But like personally, I did not choose to do that. But I think, and as you know, that Imam Abu Hanifa did not consider it something that's wajib. Actually, if you study the Hidayah, right, and I don't want to get into too much of the text here because I don't know. If your
do your magic on the audience, they're gonna be like, whoa, fiqh, and women can't understand fiqh. Go for it.
Well, I want to stay on track here. The idea, right, that
because it's not an obligation according to the Hanafi nor the Maliki madhab. It's not.
Right. But this idea that women, it's better for them to only stay at home and only do things that are associated with their own home life. If a woman chooses to do that, alhamdulillah, Allahu Akbar, that's beautiful. But making that as the only aspect of her life that she should focus on, is not. I mean, that was my pushback. It's like, that's not part of our tradition. So that was definitely an experience that left an impact, right, on me and my development, and recognizing that while the traditional learning and the texts are something that we need to engage with, it's also the form in which it happens, right? Mm-hmm. So I don't know what yours has been. Like, what was your madrasa experience like?
I mean, mine generally was I suppose...
Clearly, let me just say on the offset, they couldn't really try to, they couldn't put you in their own home.
They didn't manage to change me successfully, so I'm one of the examples of where it goes wrong. They're like, this is how you don't want to turn out. But the thing, Ustadha, is a lot of sometimes a lot of people ask, women especially, girls who are interested in the deen, that there's many men who go and study, they go enroll in madrasas, sometimes travel abroad, do these kind of things. There ain't as many female kind of examples out there, or maybe there are, but they're not well known. So what was it was it just the same you felt as to your male counterparts, or was it much more of a struggle going through it? Because people are pretty familiar, the normal run-of-the-mill madrasa kind of lifestyle as kind of boys and men go through it. But what about for women? I mean, was it something you found that this was exceptionally difficult, or not really? It was just something which wasn't really so much of a struggle. I mean, what was it like?
Yeah. So, by the way, after I did that madrasa study, I also went to Hartford Seminary, right? And I did the Islamic studies and chaplaincy program there. I also traveled to Jami Azhar. I was selected as, one of the 10 females to do a specialized program there. Went to Al Diwan, which is also in Medina al-Nasr in Egypt. Went to Morocco, went to Jordan.
Jami al-Azhar, for the viewers, is one of it is arguably amongst the 3 most ancient classic Muslim universities in the world. So amidst Zaytuna and Qarawiyyin.
Yeah. So I would say that the question is always like, what are you going to do with it? Right? So I think for Muslim men, when they're doing this, there's an end goal. Like, okay, maybe I'm going to become an imam of the masjid. Maybe exactly. I'm going to administer to, I think for a lot of Muslim women in this, it's like, okay, well, what is this going to, how is this going to impact me in the future? If like, I need to be the breadwinner, am I going to get a job? Like all of those kinds of questions. So that can actually, the uncertainty can cause a lot of anxiety. And this is why I believe a lot of females, and again, this is my experience, drop out. Like, most of my friends would be in a program, and this is anywhere that I went. They would be there for like 1 or 2 years, and then they would drop out. So part of this is that in order for us to produce these females, I think we have to value female scholarship. We have to put the women who are already trained or are in training into these spaces. And that's why I want to actually say Jazakallah khair. And it's not just because, you have to put a woman on, you're putting a woman on. I think
it's the token woman we're putting on. Hell no. Hell no. We value immensely, Ustadha.
Okay, Allahu Akbar. So I think it's important to do that, because then it gives other Muslim women an opportunity to say, okay, here's something that I could look up to maybe, or here's an opportunity for me. Oh, is chaplaincy something that I could do? Or is something that, whatever it is that they can utilize. There are Muslim women who started their own nonprofits. I mean, if you look at Ustadha Tahera, for example, I don't know if you're familiar with her, and Rabata. But, for the viewers out there, I want to give them a shout out as well. Rabata is an absolutely amazing circle of Muslim women, and it's really led by Ustadha Tahera, and she is, a sheikha without a doubt. You have somebody like, Ustadha Faryal Salim right here in Chicago, who is a professor of Islamic studies and runs the Islamic chaplaincy program at American Islamic College. And, she's been training young Muslim women across the country in chaplaincy, is a good friend of mine. And we've been thinking about, like, how do we really create opportunities for other Muslim women? But in order to do that, like, you can't have like 4 guys on a panel and then just stick one Muslim woman on it and say, alhamdulillah. it's changing in the United States. I don't know
Yeah.
what's up with the UK. Like,
It's way behind, way behind. I mean, the United States is in these matters. I feel much, they, I don't know about light years, but they are years ahead of the UK in matters of like this. And I think that it does come back to a bit of what you were saying earlier on about the kind of sectarianism, the depth of sectarianism that is found here, the kind of bashing that goes on between groups, the intra-group kind of dynamics is a lot more malicious, I feel, here, and therefore it kind of projects a stronger grip and control. Whereas in the US, I feel even when people disagree, they it's not that, if it appears, it may be deep, but it appears that it's not that deep. Like they'll still sit together, they'll go to conferences together, that it so there's a lot more tolerance. I feel. I mean, I'm sure that human beings are human beings, but I'm just saying that it feels like a lot more harmony out there.
sounds like I'm gonna have to be a chaplain to you. Are you trying to tell me something? Like, are you getting way too much? Like, I hear like nobody across the spectrum is like, whether
Accepting
you're Sufi
me.
or
Nobody
you're
accepts
Salafi
me.
or all the other.
अकेले आए हैं यार इस दुनिया में. That's it. We've just got. There's nobody, not the Salafis, not the Sufis, not the Deobandis, not the Barel. Nobody accepts me.
Well, they say if nobody accepts you, you must be doing something right. Wallahu alam,
Allahu Akbar. Allahu Akbar. Right. I wanted to, on the Alamiya thing, as a woman who's trained in that, you did manage to you did actually follow that through into a career, like you've mentioned, because this was a great concern, as it is for many. This is a great concern for, regardless of gender, that even men think, well, what will I do once I become an alim? What am I going to do? I mean, in fact, in the US, it is still much more prosperous. Here, I think it's worse than slave labor, what they pay these kind of imams, and when you pay peanuts, and that's what you get in return. But for women, I feel there's there isn't even a blip on the radar for the kind of scope of what they like here. Like if you became a female imam, or a female sheikha, let's say an ustadha, like what would you do apart from maybe you set up your own private classes? But beyond that, there's, I feel it is an uphill struggle. But you managed to kind of get through that and work forward into chaplaincy, didn't you? But that's correct, isn't it? And in addition to that, you have participated on the Islamic platform. You've attended conferences. You've mentioned that you've gone to these kind of scholars meetings, these board meetings. How was that? Because it is even in the US, the female worldwide, the female participation is minuscule. So how was that? Was it like, what the hell is this woman doing here? Or woman, are you here to take the lunch order? Was it like, or what was it like?
Actually, I want to say that at least the Muslim chaplains in Chicago, right,
Yeah.
and some of the Imams, ulama and the Imams of Chicago, and maybe it's because where you're from and you're native to that space, people actually like know you, they recognize you, they know your strengths, they know your weaknesses. I think when there's a matter that they know that I would specialize in, or that someone else would have an expertise in, there is this sense of like recognition of that. And I want to give again, I've been doing all these shout outs while I'm here, right?
Go for it. Absolutely.
Some of this I think has to do with the amount of knowledge that a person has, because true students of knowledge, when you engage with them, it's very easy, like literally, like, subhanAllah, someone has trained in whatever it is, right? Whichever madrasa, whichever curricula that they follow, whether it's Dars Nizami or it's, from Medina, there's a sense of humility in those people, especially the men that I've come across, that if they have studied the deen, truly, they've took their time to understand, the vastness as well as the depth, right, of the Islamic tradition. There's a sense of humility as well as a sense of kind of, okay, let me hear this person out, right, without, trying to. So in places and spaces where I think where that's like if there's true people of knowledge, yes, I've not only been accepted but been referred to. But in other places where people, you know, have, you know, the kind of knowledge where it's like, well, my sheikh said this, and I've read this text, and they'll point to one text. That in those spaces, yeah, of course, I've not only been dismissed, but and that's why when I think about hard Islam, I think about, you know, subhanallah, how that's actually impacting the way in which a person is able to establish their own relationship with Allah Ta'ala. Like when I think about spiritual wellness and the tie to being able to practice Islam fully, you know, this is a really important aspect for Muslims all over the world right now, because you have all this time and all this space to put effort in, and people are asking all the time, like, what's a good way to learn Islam, and what's a good, you know, what are some lectures I should listen to? And it goes back to the question you asked about, like, well, how do women find each other, or what do women do when it comes to this type of ilm seeking? And I would say that I think a good place to start is to own your own relationship with Allah Ta'ala, right? Like, if you start thinking of Islam as more of something you must do out of a book, it's bound to close once COVID is over, right?
Of course. It's a personal journey.
Absolutely. So if it's something that allows for you to really deeply think about, okay, what does this matter? Why is it there? Another is, you know, if people are spending some time, and this is to the sisters who are listening especially, there's a lot of wellness in meditation. And what we do for salah, which comes from the Arabic root word of sila, right, to connect. Same thing as yoga, right? To yoke something, it's to connect. The form that we use, as well as the Quran that we use, there was actually a neuroscientist who came to Northwestern about 3 years ago, and he talked about, and he wasn't even Muslim, but he talked about how different world traditions use like mantras or meditation, and when your tongue moves, and how that can release like serotonin in your body, how it calms you, brings the temperature down, all of that, right? So all of these things are tools for us. And so Muslim women, especially when they when we recite Quran, I know a lot of people are like, oh, Muslim women shouldn't even be reciting Quran publicly. I personally do it because that's my way of encouraging other Muslims, because you constantly only hear men, right? And again, all of this goes back to this conversation of, you know, what are ways for Muslim women to feel like once they come into this field, what are their opportunities? Well, if you don't see other women doing these things, there is no sense of kind of direction, right?
Because that's something you've been doing in these conferences. You've been participating. It's something which, you know, on stage, recitation of the Quran, it's a specialism of yours. On a platform with many other, let's say, mashayikh, imams, male dominated. Was that, I mean, I've heard some stories that at times people have, you know, been upset to the extent maybe they've left, you know, refused to participate or things like this. Is that true or not really? Or how have you found this experience? Because I'm thinking something like that in the UK. The UK still is not ready for things like this. Unfortunately,
Really?
But I feel I would like you to do a bit of tilawa on here, by the way. But I mean, this question that what to...
You sure? You know those haters are gonna hate you even more. You're gonna have like two people who follow you. Kidding.
Are they the angels that are just... They both just write bad deeds. They've teamed up. They go, well, this guy doesn't really have any good deeds. I'll just help you out, bro. But I mean, have you faced, you know, doing something like that on stage against... That's pure counterculture, isn't it? I mean, what's...
Yeah, that's happened once actually, but it didn't happen with so I don't know if you know, in 2013, I believe, I became the first Muslim woman to recite the Quran at the 50th anniversary of ISNA. Like, I inaugurated the whole, you know, show, so to speak. And you know, several ulama were on stage, and no one like ran off the stage. Let me tell you that much.
Okay. It's not the first time they heard a voice of a woman. I mean, you know, because somebody had asked as well, that is the voice of a woman aura? Of course it isn't. I mean, Behave, people. What kind of a ridiculous... But some scholars have said, and this comes back to your question, but yeah, focusing on the ISNA 50th inauguration.
Well, anyway, afterwards, there was a whole, conversation about it. Even NPR, which is our national public, radio broadcasting, did a whole, show on it of, what's going on, why is this of concern in the Muslim community? And, I'm not a person who would, in terms of my own seeking of knowledge, if somebody takes a position, right, like what you just said, is the voice of a woman awra when it comes to a certain type of singing or even recitation of Quran, that's the position they're taking, right? Sure. But if you go to Malaysia, Indonesia, and the ulama over there, right, they're taking a different position on that, right? And women and men recite publicly, right? Morocco, that's another, space. So, and again, if brothers are getting turned on by a Muslim woman reciting Quran, you have some other problems, bro. Seriously, I'm serious.
100%.
So I think one time, though, I was giving a lecture at a university, and I think it was down south somewhere in the United States. And, I was referring to and there were a lot of non-Muslims in the audience. And I was sharing the verses about Mary and Jesus, right? And Maryam alayhi salam and Isa alayhi salam. And, and the people who memorize Quran know this, the Hafaz may know this. Sometimes you got to you got to read the verses in order to remember how it went. So I started doing that, and the mic gets cut off.
Okay, during recitation. Midway.
During the recitation. Okay. Midpoint. I'm and a lot of the older adults, a lot of American older adults were non-Muslims especially, were what's going on? They couldn't hear me. So, afterwards I asked, the MSA president, I'm hey, I noticed the mic got cut off. And he said, yeah, because you didn't tell us that you were going to be reciting Quran.
Oh, wow. They intentionally cut you out.
Yeah. And I was
yeah,
whoa. And he's yeah. And, he went off about, Salt al-Mar'a, not just awra, he went off, basically
Haram
for a while.
And all this kind of stuff.
Yeah. So I just kind of, I listened to him, alhamdulillah, respectfully, because I think that's, that's something I always do. And my question back to him was what are you studying? He's I'm pre-med, all they see, right? So I said, do you have any female teachers? And he's yeah, of course. I'm do they wear hijab? And he's no, they're not Muslim. Do they wear clothes that reveal their, awra according to Islam? He's yeah, of course. I'm do you look down the entire time when you're in class? Or do you pay attention? Do you look at her? And he just stopped. He knew where I was going with it, right? And I was look, bro, this whole, I get it that you want to make, it's everything you want to do in Islam, you want to, somehow, make it the pristine form, but, you realize, the hypocrisy in what you're doing and what you're saying, right? Because on one hand, you want to prevent me from sharing the kalam of Allah Ta'ala, but on the other hand, you have somehow found a rukhsa for your own self, right? So people make excuses for their the times they want to use soft Islam, but somehow hold up everybody else to the hard line, right? And that's what I have a problem with, and again, for your own life, you want to do certain things, okay, but you have to remember that when you're in a public understanding of Islam, this is when I was talking about the private maximum and the public minimum idea.
Yeah, no, absolutely. I mean, you have here the concept that women participate in all social spaces. They have access to every place except the masajid, except mosques. I mean, in fact, to the extent that there was a joke about, what's the difference between, I think one of those pages shared it, that what's the difference between women and COVID, that, COVID can still get into the masjids. And it was, because that's the level, especially within the UK, the kind of segregation and prevention of women and prohibition of them entering the masajid. So, first of all, I just want to say that, so you are an absolute role model, and I think it's awesome that you've persisted on that track and remain steadfast and not being deterred by this, because that's all it simply takes. Some person, I'm shocked to hear that they actually cut out the mic. I mean, that is taking the absolute, that's taking the mick in another literal sense. But that's just despicable behavior. I mean, I couldn't, if they'd refused to invite you, that, you know, it's just their biases and prejudices from the offset. But whilst you're on stage, to cut off the mic and say this is now haram since you're going to read the Quran, oh, but you can do other things and you can listen to other people. It's a ridiculous, and I agree, a perverted kind of perspective on the deen. Yeah. So I mean, first of all, so, you know, absolute kudos to you for persisting with that. You know, barakallahu feek. And I hope many people, by the way, especially many women that do ask, do kind of take inspiration. And if you are struggling on these matters, do reach out to Ustadha on these issues. So, Ustad, before there's other questions. Would you like to do some recitation? I mean, if you,
as long as you ain't gonna cut out the mic on me.
As soon as she starts, people, we're gonna cut out the mic and we're gonna do toba, toba, toba. Right. So, no, I mean, absolutely. If you'd.
Well, something short, I guess.
Yeah.
I don't know.
Sure. I mean.
Has there been any requests? All of Surah Baqarah, people, get ready for
this is it, people. It's all going down, yeah. By the time the recitation finishes, the lockdown will be over. No, mashallah. As you see fit, something just to show the and out of curiosity, before you begin, is it something? I know there's a lot of technicalities in tajweed, and is it something that is there a particular style that you're drawn to, or is it just generally your own kind of style? Or I know some people prefer the tajweed, the tartil, the hadar, that kind of stuff. Is it some your thoughts on that?
Yeah, I mean, I'm sure some of the folks out there who are listening, or some of the followers, may have heard of something called maqamat, right?
Yeah.
So like the Quran is recited in different maqams. I actually, when I recite, I try my best to recite in a way that the average person can listen, and not, you know, it's hard to mimic something that's like, I mean, if I go all out and do Sheikh Abdul Basit style, you know, that's usually a little bit difficult for people to try to like sit there and apply to their daily lives. So, you know, I mean, I love like Nahawand, I like Raf, you know, I try for my own self to try to change it up a little bit, just so that like I'm enjoying the recitation. But yeah, for your viewers, I could just recite something short. I think today was Friday, and you know, in terms of Muslim wellness and in terms of mindfulness as Muslims, I think taking time out on Fridays, and maybe this is too Sufi for you, okay, Abu Layth, but you know, gotta love them with the you know, they keep the deen alive, you know. I'm talking about the kind of mutasawwifin who are like real warriors, you know. I'm not talking about So, as you know, in Sahih Hadith, Rasulullah told us that when a Muslim or a believer sends salawat, which is Allahumma salli ala Sayyidina Muhammad, on the Prophet, that there's an angel that delivers that salam to him, and then he responds to that salam, except on Yawm al-Jum'ah. The Prophet said, I myself respond to that. Now, without getting into the details of like, well, what does that actually mean? I think what's profound is, you know, people ask all the time, this is a question I always get, like, why do we do salawat? And I always say, you know, when you want to ask somebody to make dua for you, like you ask your mother or you ask your friends, whoever, why? Because you hope that their dua is accepted with Allah Ta'ala. So every time we send salawat on Rasulullah, he actually is making dua for us. And this is why for centuries, many of the ulama, like regardless of what, you know, the background is, their agreement, this is phenomenal, I think, that I've never found a group of ulama disagree about the significance and importance of sending salawat on Rasulullah. And the adab of making dua is to start with salawat. Why? Because you are receiving the direct dua of Rasulullah for you, right? That's profound. That's amazing. So the verse that I'd like to recite is the verse that commands us to do that. أعوذ بالله من الشيطان الرجيم بسم الله الرحمن الرحيم إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما إن الله وملائكته يصلون على النبي يا أيها الذين آمنوا صلوا عليه وسلموا تسليما صدق الله العظيم اللهم صل على سيدنا محمد وعلى سيدنا محمد وبارك وسلم. So that was actually two different recitation styles. I don't know if you caught it. So I'm sure to the ear you could kind of understand that. But
no, that was amazing, subhanallah. Shukran for that. I mean, I think it is something that I definitely want to encourage, and I know this is your message as well, Ustadha, that to build a relationship with the Quran. And it may be a different relationship for each and all, and it is an individual journey, like you were mentioning earlier on, that look, we're all on our own journey. It's not, I'm not walking your path, you're not walking somebody else's path. So that's something we can't really stress enough. So I mean, shukran for that. Right, coming to you were speaking earlier on about you were mentioning about building on from your experiences about hard Islam, soft Islam, and we've seen some of the kind of difficulties you've experienced there. Ustadha, what do you feel is kind of more prevailing? Do you feel that there is a kind of prevalence of one over the other, or is it kind of, I don't know, is it kind of seasonal, or is it does it vary between continent to continent? Are you seeing like maybe what are your thoughts on that?
Well, honestly, you follow Sirat al-Mustaqim, I think ours is a middle path, right?
But I mean, the strains that you're seeing in the dynamics in the United States, are you seeing people lean more in towards a kind of that hard path, or not really, or?
That's a good question. I mean, the United States you have to think as a person in the UK, maybe this is a little bit like you're going to have to exercise this a little bit with me. It's like, think of the UK, and then think of another 50 more countries, right? Literally, right? Or states or provinces, right? So it's hard for me to say, well, I only see soft Islam or only see hard Islam. A lot of UK folks tell me, my friends say, oh, you Americans are very liberal compared to us. And so liberal is often associated with this idea of soft Islam, right? That many Americans are, they give in and they kind of assimilate, or that they don't really fight for their kind of Muslim identity, which I don't believe is true. I think there are many Muslims who are really devout in their, practice of Islam, at least the ritual aspects of Islam. They may engage civically in a way where some people believe, well, you shouldn't go into politics, for example, right? That for some people is part of soft Islam or whatnot. So my reading of it is that you'll find both. You'll find kind of these circles of both. But my friends from the UK, and again, maybe, you know, when there is a third eye looking in, you know, maybe there's I could be biased, and maybe they're more objective in that sense, or that could be their experience, is that they say, well, Americans tend to be, or American Muslims tend to take more liberal positions on things. But I wouldn't call it that. I think that people, American Muslims here, are building institutions. They're absolutely thinking about, you know, what does it mean to be Muslim, you know, trying to put that as part of their priority, and how we engage, even when we do so civically.
I mean, isn't liberal generally is a bit of a kind of like a dirty word in the United States? I don't think the UK necessarily sees liberal as the general broader UK and Europe. I don't think we perceive the term liberal to be negative necessarily. I know in America, liberal is like, even in a political sense, they can't stand this, you know, people that are liberals generally. I mean, is that, does that also factor in? Because when people are saying soft or liberal Islam, there's already a backdrop narrative that seems to have a disdain, a dislike towards liberalism. Do you feel that, or is that just our perspective as Brits?
I think it's specific to you all, to be honest. Like, I don't, yeah. I mean, the UK is, again, like, I'm always still trying to figure it out. Like, you know, subhanAllah, it's a very interesting place. I mean, you know, I found that, you know, you have like certain groups that only like associate only with themselves as well, right? Whereas like I would say in the United States, many of our masajid are built based on ethnic backgrounds, which I think is true somewhat of the UK as well. But there's a lot of ideological institutionalization in the UK, whereas I think in the United States, it's more on like your ethnic background. So you have Bangladeshis making their masjid. In the south suburbs of Chicago, you have, you know, a lot of people from the Gulf. So you have like the Arab community. You have like
more
you know,
ethnic kind of based. But there is something that we here in the UK used to, right? We used to picture when it came to American Muslim societies, and that was, there was this kind of veneer, this kind of like a shiny, glossy, I don't know, like an appearance to it, an allure to it. I feel that in the last few years, you know, a lot more, or maybe it's just become apparent, but a lot more kind of politics and kind of nastiness, or there's been scandals, there's been many things, there's been infighting that has kind of surfaced. Maybe not to the extent that people are calling each other kafirs and stuff like they do in the UK, but it's kind of been, sorry, I'm just hearing a kind of interference thing there. So do you I mean, and do you feel this as well, or is this just something we're sensing here in the UK?
So I'm thinking what your viewers are probably thinking right now. Like, he's trying to like dance around the actual question. So if you want to ask me something straight up, bro, just go ahead. You don't have to keep like, you know, tiptoeing around whatever it is that you want to ask.
Like, what I'm trying to say is,
straight up, bro. Like, you can't be like, we
yeah?
over here in the UK have been observing you all over there, and it looks like you have some family feuds happening. Could you please elaborate?
Okay. खुल के बात करते हैं. Look, no, look, there was this, okay, if we backtracked, let's say a decade, there was this veneer, that this appearance that the American Islam had to the UK people, that look, one, it's very presentable, which it still is, but that people are, they're generally nice, they don't do much rajniti amongst themselves, these kind of like backstabbing or digs, or if they do, it's very low-key, under the radar. Recently, I feel in the last few years, there's been many kind of, there have been many scandals, there's been people distancing themselves from other people publicly, there's been, a lot of the kind of dirty laundry has come out. People have been kind of openly boycotting, making posts against, a lot of that British kind of nastiness that we used to see here. You know, it's only a matter of time Sharif kab tak banoge?
Well,
No,
here in Chicago, Sharif, we still, we have a sense of, respect for all. But I think that there has been, you're right. You have to put it into context of what's also happening. And you kind of alluded to this earlier, is that as a society, what are some of the other conversations? I'm not talking about just as Muslims, but think of the larger context of society. Like if you have conversations around women's rights, you have the hashtag Me Too movement.
The Me Too movement, yeah, exactly.
And so I think that absolutely impacts, and I mean, in my opinion, it's actually pushed forward conversations that really do need to happen, which, I think some of the brothers, especially who are viewing this, need to, like, again, we can go off on the conversation of like feminism or not, or whatever. But
I was going to follow through to that, but just following on with what you're saying now.
I really want some people to understand that, look, part of the conversation, is that you have to understand that many women, feel that because there's a group of men, whomever it has been, that have not, where their voices have been continuously negated, right? When women feel that way for a long time, when they do get that opportunity and they're putting it forward, some may disagree and say, well, what about the shari'i rights of this person? What about, the ability to be able to, for this person to, the guilt, that they're innocent before proven guilty, on all of that conversation, right? And like, is it okay to put a post against a person when you don't really even know what actually happened? All of those sort of things were coming out. I think on one hand you had, many Muslim women who felt like, wow, if we're talking about like whether it was a particular scandal, right? Or whether it was about, there's a number of issues.
Did you feel that these things were actually happening? People were preying on victims. They were like women, the usual, because in America, a lot of it was to do with women and secret marriages and this kind of stuff. Now, did you feel that this was an issue generally, or was this an anomaly? Was this something that is a one-off, or this is actually a serious cause for concern that, certain, let's say, people in positions of power or trust may be preying on vulnerable women? Do you feel that is the case, or?
As a chaplain, I will tell you that yes, right? And this is not, again, specific to Northwestern, but I cannot tell you, right, Abu Layth, or Mufti, Ustadh Abu Layth, the number of women that I have personally, right, given pastoral care to, who have been devastated by this. And what this in turn does to them is when their trust is broken over and over again, they are unable then to have a proper relationship with another man, right? And so one man's destruction is now impairing another man from being able to have a long kind of longevity, or in terms of relationship with this woman. So keep that in mind as well, that this is like, this is going to impact people. So going back to your question of, was this something just like as a one-off thing, or is this something that's very prevalent? Absolutely. I think the reason why you saw the kind of response that you saw from people of being like, okay, hold on, I got to be real careful, because, this is actually a tipping point for some people, right? If they don't take a stand and say, hey, this cannot happen, this should not happen, then it's going to continue to cause other issues in society that really shouldn't happen. And, I want to push back on those people who say, oh, yeah, those scholars who took a hard line, against these other scholars were just doing it because they don't want to lose their following, they don't want to lose their female base. I'd like to believe that that's not true. I'd like to believe that they actually...
I want to just put something in there. I mean, obviously, we're in the UK here. Sometimes we don't get all of the facts. And I like, just real talk here. Like, so I know there was a case recently, this whole thing with, a little while back with Ustadh Osama Khanan. Now, with Ta'leef, now, obviously, we're in the UK, but from what I was hearing, that there was a few women had come forward and said, look, when he was well, now, Ustadh is obviously in very poor health. with the whole ALS thing, and may Allah make things easy for his family and anybody who's suffering from any kind of illness. I mean, but in this particular case, they had said, well, you know, he exploited a position of power, a position of kind of trust that he had, because he was married, and obviously women that were coming to the mosque kind of saw him. He was, you know, nice, a handsome stud kind of guy, good looking. So, and he kind of used that to allure them. But I mean, there's a counter argument here that did they not know? I mean, was that not something that they genuinely just found attractive and were attracted to? What was the actual, I mean, was he, I mean, what, because the counter argument is that these women willfully were doing what they were doing. I mean, and many of them even knew that he had a wife and children because he lived in the community or something. So I was really curious about this, that I know the Me Too thing was overarching and a very powerful kind of current. And anybody who questioned something, they just kind of slammed to the side. But as a distant, remote viewer, observer of all of this, I felt that, wait a minute, these women were coming to that masjid. And I heard some of them weren't even masjid attendees. They were never people that used to come to his classes. Is that, what are your thoughts on all of this?
So to be honest, I don't know any of them personally. I've never had a conversation, so it's hard for me to comment on like what those details are. But what I want to, you know, pause us and to start thinking about is, while everyone has, what you're suggesting is that everyone has self-responsibility, right? Especially in Islam in terms of a baligh or a baligha person, right?
Of course. Yeah.
So while I absolutely agree that every single person has self-responsibility over their own actions, you have to remember that these cases of spiritual, sexual, predatory behavior are... You can't treat them in the same manner like, okay, you know, somebody who's like seeking, you know, even like a second marriage, or, you know, is talking to their wife about this idea, and, you know, there's the conversations happening, and there's, you know, if you want to talk about doing it shara, it's not the same thing. Like, they're basically grooming these women, right?
I'm taking it with that down that avenue. I'm saying that, let's say these imams, they're in it for sex, that's all. They are not interested in any kind of legitimate, established family unit. They're not thinking long term. They're not thinking we're going to have loads of children and live together. But so you know, some women that come across them think, oh yeah. But how does that? What I'm trying to say is, but men generally will be, you know, they will be kind of chasing after women. So what makes this different?
So my question back to you is, should we hold people of knowledge and people who are supposed to have a moral compass of integrity, should we hold them to a higher standard or not?
You see, now I would say that personally, I would feel that yes, in certain matters, but I would ask what those matters were, because I felt in some of these cases, this is another thing, this is what I'm talking about. I felt that there was, what was happening was, it was actually, I mean, this is an interpretation, and I could be absolutely wrong here. I'm sure people will think I am. That it wasn't more than abuse, it was actually a sense of rejection. And rejection was then being translated as abuse, because rejection doesn't fly, but abuse does fly. So people were saying, well, actually,
Whoa, back up on that. So hold on. You know, now I don't know if you're trying to get me all like riled up and get me in character mode, because I think you're like, oh,
this is gonna be Chi-Town going down.
No. So I mean, you know,
yeah, but would you not feel?
I don't know what you're trying to do here. If you're trying to rile me up and
no,
you know,
I'm being genuine, real talk. Like, is it not that a sense of rejection? And it's not to say that the guy isn't wrong. You see, what I'm trying to say is he is wrong for what he is doing, but I don't see, like, so for example...
Thank you for acknowledging that.
I do acknowledge that. So there's many of these people of positions, imams, that will see some women and think, oh yeah, I'd love to kind of get on with her. So they'll start messaging or they'll start communicating now. But what I don't buy is this, the counterpart is so naive and vulnerable and like has no idea, turns up at 2 a.m. to a hotel room, thinks, I know we're just here. Maybe we're going to go over Sahih al-Bukhari or Tafsir al-Qurtubi or... I mean, I'm thinking, isn't this a bit far-fetched?
I mean, I know you're saying that, but you have to remember that so on one hand, you know, if you recognize that when somebody is a sexual spiritual predator, they're literally grooming you over time, and like, you know, it's when
what does that mean? What does that mean?
These women who are in a very vulnerable place.
Why
right?
are they in a vulnerable place? Just asking.
I'm sorry?
Why are they in a vulnerable place? I'm just asking. It's a masjid.
So
why are they in a vulnerable place?
No, so I'm not talking about just like an actual physical space. I'm talking about, you know, as in their lives, right?
Okay.
So if a woman is and this applies to this, not just this situation, in any situation, right? And it could go even sometimes both ways, right? I want to recognize that too, right? So when you are in a position that makes money, as well as, you know, lots of, like, you're gaining, right, from this idea of being that moral grounding for other people, but at the same time, you are now absolutely hypocritical and destroying us. You recognize that that's wrong, right? Period.
I agree.
But if you're asking, well, shouldn't these women be all, you know, if that's what your question is, like, well, shouldn't these women also be held accountable, or, you know, where is the sensibility of women in all of this? I mean, part of it is first recognizing that as soon as you say that, though, you have to remember that so many women don't even come out and say anything, because that's exactly the rhetoric that they hear. It literally bars them from actually ever saying anything, because it's what we call victim shaming or blaming, right? So it's like, I'm not trying to say that critical thinking shouldn't be applied in a conversation so that you can avoid things and prevent things in the future. But you have to remember that certain language, when you've been through a traumatic experience, or you've been through something where someone you believe personally has taken advantage of you, soon as you start hearing things like, oh,
but
well,
I want to ask, what is that advantage that they've taken?
What is that?
Advantage, like you say, when somebody's taken advantage of you. Now, I could understand if it was like, let's say, for example, somebody comes to me and
you
says,
don't know what promises were made to these people. You don't know what kind of, oh yeah, you know, like ideas of what's going to happen, and you know,
so
you may be putting it. So from a male, from your perspective, hey, it was all about, you know, just getting together. Well, you don't know that for sure. You don't know what else was shared with her. I mean, for a woman to put her in an emotional place like that, right? And we don't know the details of exactly what else happened. You all are putting it from the perspective of, especially, I think, a lot of the, you know, things I've seen online, like a lot of the bros are like, oh, what? It was free sex. Like, why couldn't you just be okay with that? No, actually, and I don't know the cases particularly about the one we're talking about, but the ones I've dealt
generally,
with, it's not just about, you know, her, you know, it was just for fun, right? Like, a lot of the brothers who are dismissing these women are saying, oh, it was just for fun. So what did you lose? You actually, you know, why are you crying? Well, like, guess what? No, that's not necessarily true.
I'm not saying, you see, what I'm trying to say is, I'm definitely saying there was hurt. I've never said, and I've not said they were right in what they're doing, but I feel that people are translating hurt as abuse. You see, because when I feel hurt, I feel wronged. Now, I translate wronged as a wrong, but it's not always so. So, for example, if my friend said to me, look, I don't want to hang out with you, I don't want to be your friend, he starts blanking me. Now, I feel wronged. Now, because I feel wronged, I think he is wrong. But objectively speaking, it's his choice. It's a free world. You know, he's not like wrong in any kind of sense like that. What I'm trying to say is, I do agree that a lot of these women, that they find that attractive. So they embark on these things knowing that. But when there's a sense of rejection, and I'm saying the whole enterprise is wrong, but when there's a sense of rejection, do they not just say, well, it's easier. Look, if I say, oh, I was rejected, people are going to say, well, you were a fool. If I say I was abused and groomed, I'm going to get the world of sympathy. I mean, is this not I mean, I'm just being real, just real
Well,
talk, saying it as
you're
I.
already, I mean, look, you already assumed a whole bunch of things, though. Like, if you hear yourself out, you literally assumed a bunch of things about these women, right? Which, again, I think that's like how male psychology projects itself on women before they even have the conversation. It's like, oh, well, some women, they must really like that. And so, like, when they put themselves in it, then why are they crying about it later? Like, you just literally projected how men or whoever it is that you be hanging out with, bro, is thinking about this and putting it on these women, right? That's not cool. I mean, again,
I'm
all I'm
not,
trying
by
to
the
say
way,
is,
I'm not trying to say, just to be clear, I'm not trying to say there are no abuse cases. I'm not trying to say that these people are right for trying to want to have sex with women, these imams and whatever. That is not the platform. It is utterly unacceptable. I am clearly on point with that. What I'm trying to say is we know, come on, let's face it, human beings are much more complex and conniving than we appear to be sometimes. Now, so just because a person says, "Oh, you know what? I was so vulnerable because wow, I had no idea that this." Like, so I want to know what was the advantage that they actually took. Like, did they? I could
so
understand if she said, "Look, I needed money," as an example. I needed money. I went to this person. He said, "I'll give you this if you perform this sexual act." That's clearly understood. Everybody can see how advantage is being taken. How does it be taken here? I wanna understand this.
so again, I don't. When you're asking specifically about this situation, I don't know who these
No,
people were. I
but
don't know the details of them.
generically, yeah.
Well, part of the problem with this is that when you approach a situation with this idea that, oh, well, this woman just wants attention, or this woman is just doing this. First of all, I'll tell you right now, the women, subhanAllah, that I have grown up with, that I know, and majority of the Muslim, if we're speaking specifically to Muslim women, our honor and our dignity, our izzah, is something that we value. Like, it is part of like
Of course.
our heritage. It is part of our tradition. And so,
And I'm not calling these women.
Really,
I'm not
no.
calling these
So
women
it's
cheap
really,
or anything.
it's actually quite. When Muslim men, when I hear this from Muslim men, that, oh, well, these women, they're just kind of, the questions around these women. I'll give you the example of the case with the madrasa that I was talking about earlier, without naming, the institution. But instantly, people started to blame the first woman that came out. And they were like, well, why was she in that place with him? What was she doing with him? And, like, all of these questions. And
no, but there is a distinction. There is a distinction. I'm just saying, one with obviously where children are involved. That's clearly unacceptable. And there's no way that could ever be justified. The other thing is there is a distinction in a proper, a vertical scenario where a person, for example, you are in my institute, I've got you here, you have to come here to do something, I've got a lot of control here, and you're kind of intimidated because of factors. But in those situations, it's very understandable that, look, they are victimized.
I'm telling you as a chaplain that majority of the cases that I have seen, yes, women have been compromised. They are in that vulnerable position. They are being taken advantage of. And
what is,
you have to remember,
just to expand, what is this advantage that's being taken?
Well,
as an example, what is it that's being taken? Like,
so
how are they taking advantage? Because they're not forced to be in that space. They can just leave and go home.
That's what you think. Well, see, that's where all of your misconceptions are. Is that, oh, well, why couldn't you just, run out the door or flee out the door? Like, literally, psychologically, right? Psychologists have studied this. When you're in trauma mode, like, you sometimes just shut down even, right? You're not even able to respond right away. And then some of the critique of these victims is, oh, well, how come she couldn't, remember or respond? Well, actually, your brain in these situations actually shuts down to the point where you're not even sometimes able to recollect the story.
Being clear, none of these situations are that kind of brutal rape or even rape scenarios. None of them are that.
That's not.
So
that's like degrading. That's like You know what? Subhanallah. When men say this, I want them to think about their own, like. And again, I don't want to get all like This is, to me,
this just real
about
talk,
like how
just,
do we treat our women, right? Like our daughters could be in this. And you know, subhanallah, like when our own family, or God forbid, our own, you know, sisters and brothers, or particularly mothers and sisters or wives are involved in it, all these other kind of critical questions seem to not apply. All of a sudden, everyone's like, you know what, subhanallah, like I want to find her the best process of healing. And the process of healing, all I'm trying to say is it doesn't start with critique to the victim, right? It's to
No,
say,
I'm
okay,
not critiquing. Look, it's not about. I'm not here to critique, and in that sense, I'm not trying to do victim blame. I'm trying to be objective, in saying that look, there's certain scenarios we clearly understand. Like if I said, look, this is clearly abuse. There's physical abuse. You contact corporal, like you've hit someone. There's verbal abuse. I swore to the person. There's things like, in this case, there would be rape or contact, physical contact. But these cases where they use words like they took advantage, what they're referring to is I came across this person and he built a relationship with me. This is what they're talking to. Am I correct? Or what are they?
No. So it's not just, so you have to remember you're defining abuse, and it depends on how you are actually defining abuse as well, right? So part of this conversation, and you know, it's great because you're a Mufti, and like I know you guys, like especially Malikis, love definitions, right? So some of this has to do with actually like, what are we talking about, right?
Yeah.
Bottom line though, I'm definitely an advocate for absolutely the healing process, right, for women. And I really believe that
I believe that. But I want to unpack a bit of this.
But you have to remember that some of these things that you're saying could be very triggering for women who have experienced this.
But does so where's freedom of speech? Why would I, that would be censorship in saying I wouldn't be allowed to question it.
No, so it's not about like critical thinking and rational thought. I'm talking about as a spiritual caregiver, as a pastor, right?
And I know that is your specialism. That is your specialty.
And somebody who believes that in order to really resolve something, because you're thinking from the perspective of like fears, right? As a Mufti, I'm thinking from the perspective of I am a chaplain. I need to be present and a presence of healing for this person. And I know, I'm telling you that one of the worst things you could do is to critique a victim in their time of need, because what it does to them is actually really creates a further fear of even voicing what it is that they need to in order to prevent this from happening to other people, right?
I agree 100% that, look, this is the danger, and this is why this is a very... Oh, what just happened there? We've just... I'm just connecting Ustadha back. I hope... No, it may have been that her mobile phone that she was on has disconnected. I hope we can still connect. No, Ustadha hasn't done a runner. It's... Right. I think what may have happened is perhaps the mobile phone may have actually shut down. Let me just see if I can message her else. Ustadha. Right. No. All right, Ustad, you're back. I thought it was your mobile battery. Can yes, I can. No,
Um,
yep, no.
I
Because I know you
seen the
were on your mobile phone, so
yeah. Sorry about
yeah,
that. I was trying to swipe the other issues that I was having, but
yeah.
can you
So
hear me?
yeah, I can. Yep, yep. Sorry about this. Some people
So
thought,
maybe
yeah,
some
no.
people thought I subscribed this.
Look,
Listen, okay, I'm
Usta-
not here to flee no
no,
screen here.
no,
Okay,
no.
I'm from Chi-Town.
That's it,
You know.
Shy Town. Ustadha wouldn't run away from something. And this isn't, this is just, do you know what this is? This is just real talk. It's not about being offensive. It's just about, I'm trying to echo the thoughts of certain people who equally ask them in a mode of sincerity and genuineness. Like they're not trying to be malicious when they say these things. Like when I'm, these kind of messages, what the issue was is that when somebody claims victimhood, when somebody says, now that is a very sensitive issue because on one hand you don't want to you don't want to kind of scare away the victim or add insult to injury, but on the other hand, just like a claim, does it have to be looked at that what is like just feeling hurt? Because I accept hurt is wrong and bad, they've been wronged, but we are hurt in many ways. Like I'm hurt because my friend doesn't want to be my friend anymore. But nobody would take that as as a case of abuse. Like if my friend said, I don't want to be your friend anymore, so, or refused to take my calls, and I would be hurt. But that's not a case of abuse. Now, I'm just saying that I feel that the people, like you said, that
So you have to remember that abuse is defined by who is it defined by? Is it defined by you or the person who's facing the abuse, right? Like that's part of the conversation too.
subjective. It's a subjective experience. Is that what we're saying?
Well, so if part of this is to try to say, well, so let me ask you a question, right?
Yeah, go for it.
I've heard this like kind of conversation happening many times, and I'm curious, and especially for some of your followers, is it because like what's the reason for this insistence of questioning or like wanting to question the victims? Like I'm curious too, right?
Sure,
Like
sure.
what is it like?
I'm not interested. I'm not interested in questioning the victim. I'm interested in the definition of what is constituting abuse. The victim, I've got no interest in questioning a victim's narrative. What I'm saying is, what is it? This is why I was asking, what is the thing that has been taken advantage of? What is it? Like, because if you're going to say what it is they are false promises. Like,
It's not just
false
false promises.
promises are bad and wrong.
It's
But
I mean, we're talking about groping, touching women in ways that are not,
physical.
and then
I agree
saying,
with
well,
that.
you know what, you are, not a minor, and you came here, and the other idea around this is like, well, what is consent, right? And I know that the folks who are constantly, in the victim blaming and shaming like world are constantly saying, well, was there consent? Was there not consent? And in the United States, we have, at a larger scale in terms of policy, we're really clear about that, right?
But
it's
just to be clear, Ustadha, sorry, carry on. Yeah.
Consent can be stopped at any point, right? And I'm not just talking about in like Muslim situations. I'm talking about in general.
I accept that. Ustadha, just to be clear, in these cases, the abuse being alleged is not about physicality. The abuse being alleged is that I was taken advantage of over this period of time.
Not necessarily.
Okay, so those cases are clear.
You and I were not told. Yeah, they were not. So here's one of the issues I will say, and maybe that's the only place I'll agree with you, is the transparency part. Is that we don't have a lot of information about these situations, to be honest. And a lot of time, like a lot of these people who did say something, like an institution came out and they said whatever they said, but then they weren't really transparent about like, well, what actually happened. And to be honest, general public was actually, I would say, whichever side they were on, were more concerned about the fact that like, okay, well, what does this actually all mean? I will say that what I think really needs to happen with our so-called, like, the mega scholars of the Muslim world is there is, and I don't know how many of your viewers will agree with me or not, is that it's not just about these situations with public figures. Yes, they do have, I believe they have a greater responsibility, especially if they are claiming to have a certain level of offering a moral compass for others. Mm-hmm. And especially if they are religious or spiritual leaders. Mm-hmm. But we don't have rules of engagement or interaction for the general Muslim population. So a lot of young people, you know, who are, whether they're doing online dating, whether they're seeing each other, whether they're, you know, like our stats in the United States say something along the lines of like 60% of American Muslim women have, you know, sex in college or in premarital sex, mm-hmm. about 70% of Muslim men. So, and these numbers, you know, may range, you know, go up and down, but the fact is that it's out there, right? Like people can hide from it and say, oh, the Muslims are not impacted by this. So when there is, when there are relationships that are happening in which there is more chance of that kind of abuse to happen, the real question I had is like, well, where are those guidelines, right, for Muslims in general? Yeah. And
mm-hmm. No, and I agree. I think these things nobody would disagree with, and I think also the physical touch, the molesting or groping, I don't think anybody would disagree in their right mind. Maybe some people would, just nutcases, but I don't think anybody in their right mind would disagree with that being abuse. So if a woman was here and somebody just groped her, that is clear abuse. The situations that were being discussed on social media, it's not about individuals, but the situations that were being discussed was about spiritual abuse. And what it was saying, it was not about physical abuse. It was saying that because these people have positions of trust, the public flocks to them and is drawn to them. And if they willfully engage, both parties willfully engage in some kind of courtship, like they start kind of texting and meeting up and having flirting and having a sexual dynamic and tension or whatever, it doesn't matter how much really, because the woman is necessarily being groomed. And I just struggle to believe that, because she's an adult, there's no coercion, there's no groping wasn't the issue. The issue was because the person has a position of trust.
That's because your understanding of coercion, right? That's your understanding of what it means to bring somebody into a place where you know, there is a certain level of vulnerability.
All women, all people.
Because I have seen cases mm-hmm. where the scholar mm-hmm. will justify whatever he's doing by saying, oh, well, you know, there's mata, but, you know, there's different opinions on this. And, oh, well, you know, like using their knowledge even to try to like say, oh, this is justified, and misusing their
positions of power not attractive to people? They certainly are they not? So I mean, so it's natural. Exactly.
That doesn't mean that it should be taken for.
No, but what I mean by that is
you should take advantage of it.
But once again, what does taking advantage? Like, what I'm trying to say is, it's equal. Like, it's equal. It's understandable that these women in these cases, or certain women in certain cases, would be drawn to a person in a position of power, because power by its very nature is attractive. So,
yeah, but how is that the woman's? You can't.
It's not just as the men would be drawn to beauty. I mean, is the man being groomed because the woman is beautiful? I'm just saying that. So
the issue with that argument, Abu Layth, is that mm-hmm. when you say that in itself, you're already saying that, well, a man shouldn't be blamed because.
No, I'm saying there should be equal responsibility, because you see, this is my point. I'm saying both are wrong. I'm not saying the man is okay. I'm saying yes. In fact, on the other day, just yesterday, we were speaking about men, and I said I agree that men by nature, this is all they were hardwired to chase. Now, I agree the Imam was wrong. Or these kind of people in these positions of power, they know that women will be drawn to them because of their position. But I refuse to accept that just because they have a position of power, the women become like their cognitive faculties shut off, and they become these naive, vulnerable people that I can't really think properly, I can't think straight because, oh my God, you're so powerful. Come on, I mean, isn't that stretching the
It's
narrative?
not, no, I think you're also painting it in like a completely, look, Dr. Ingrid Mattson has a really amazing program that she started. It's called the Hurma Project. I don't know if you've heard of it, right? It's focusing on this idea that, why is it that we have to protect women who have been, according to them, abused.
Okay.
And as much as you can argue that if a person willful, like what is considered their willful position into the space, you can sit there and critique these women, but the truth is that you and I don't know exactly what happened in those particular situations. Sure. Number one, sure. Right? What I can
but
say
what I'm trying
is
to say,
that
why, if we don't know, why must the woman always be right? Just asking. Why can't, like, if we don't know the facts, why is it we automatically lean? It's like in public, if a man slaps a woman or a woman slaps a man, everybody assumes the woman must have been right for slapping the man. Just basic social psychology. Whereas the man must have been an abuser for slapping a woman. Now, this is our basic kind of backdrop, psychosocial narrative. But why can't we be in the middle?
Up and understand. Okay, so if you're asking in general, like why, there may be multiple, reasons for that. But I want you to understand that you may be perceiving right now that, a woman is always like, people are always going to believe the woman. Actually, that's not true. The fact that you and I are even having this conversation is this constant push against the fact that when women who are expressing whatever it is that's happened to them, immediately there's constant like, oh, well, what were you doing there? Oh, well, how did that happen?
But is that not a genuine question? Like at 2 a.m. in a hotel room.
I don't know about what situation you're talking about, right? Like you keep going back to this like 2 a.m. hotel room somewhere. I don't know what you know about what was going on. Like, you need to fill me in. I have no idea what you're talking about, bro.
I don't know why they keep telling me these stories, but yeah. But I mean, you get my point.
But Islam, I get what you're trying to say. That Islam says that every individual has a responsibility, right? كلكم راع. Every single person has their responsibility. What I'm trying to express is that in the situations that you have asked me about, in terms of some of these kind of like glorified people on, these pedestals who had these women kind of, coming to their circles, and over time, and there are these like, what I would call like spiritual predators. Like they literally would justify, right, whatever they were doing that was Islamically not okay. And I do believe that the women in these cases were vulnerable, right, in terms of their knowledge base, in terms of their understanding of what was actually happening. And then also there's a psychological element really to consider in all of this. Now, in the end of it, right, by the way, I don't know how we like shifted to this topic.
No, but I think this is very This is very fascinating, and the reason why I'm asking you these things, Ustadha, is because I can ask you, and we can be just real and have this conversation. And I feel these kind of conversations need to be had because people are thinking them on all sides of spectrums, and this is genuine thought on the ground. This isn't something to kind of, it's nothing pernicious, or it's nothing, obviously it's not like let's target somebody, or it's just real talk that these things do agree, and I agree with you.
But what I'm trying to push back on is that you have to remember that I know you're thinking, oh, it's like, a hashtag world now, and every time a case happens, a woman's always right. That's not the case. That's what I'm telling you, right?
No, I don't agree. I'm not saying that.
Women are constantly actually like
look,
the other thing you have to remember is there's always an equal response,
sure,
right? So you have to remember, when you devastate, like even the hadith of Rasulullah, like if you keep devastating a people, right, you're gonna get a complete, like almost like a a response that says absolute, like I'm going to stand here, I'm going to stand firm, and I'm not going to back down.
Absolutely. Look,
and why? And the people on the front lines have to do that who are fighting and advocating for women's rights because of the amount of negligence, as well as
And look, I absolutely, and I feel, first of all, may Allah, any woman, any person, any victim who's going through anything, may Allah, make things easy for them and their family. But I want to, you mentioned something about spiritual abuse, and I want to say that, look, there's a certain vignette, there's a certain a narrative that we clearly recognize, like let's say the Pir Sahib scenario that happens in the East, India, Pakistan. You'll get certain Pir Sahibs that will sit there. Most of the people that come are women, and they're very kind of ignorant village folk or uneducated, and what they'll do is say, okay, there's a magic thing, come in my room, I'm going to get this better, you know what, to do this, what you have to do for this spell to work is you have to kind of take your top off, you have to do this, you have to do this. Sometimes they've got basically manipulating them, abusing them, because abusing their ignorance to this, and just really taking advantage. Now, if you ask me what is being taken advantage of here, I would say advantage of the actual naivety, the ignorance. They've gone there to get a taweez, let's say, this kind of amulet. And this person, now I just want to contrast this. Let me just present the scenario. So this everybody can recognize. And we all agree that's wrong. On the other scenario, I also agree this Imam Sahib or these leaders are wrong. But what's happening here is like people are on social media. Girls are chatting to them, they're chatting to girls. People come to them, so in some of these things, people who hold talks, for example, girls come, they're kind of like, hey, Imam, whatever, and these guys are chatting back, and they've got phone numbers, and they start flirting, and they start getting on, and the girl also finds that, oh wow, he's an Imam, and this is so amazing, and maybe in her mind she's got a vision, we could get married, and we're going to have a beautiful family, and maybe he plays along with that thought, maybe he does, maybe he doesn't, I don't know. Now, what happens is usually there's some intimacy. There's probably, it's a sexual thing at some point. And then later on, he's probably moved on to someone else. Now, she says, you know what, thinking back about it, I think I was abused. Now, the question is, well, okay, what was the abuse? So she says, well, he took advantage of me just simply being there. I'm not quite sure, how I see them as distinct. Like, on one hand, I see where you have these Pir Sahibs just touching women as they come into their rooms and doing things like that as clear abuse. On this hand, where there's flirtation and it's bi-directional, it's both ways, I feel both are culpable, both are responsible.
So the reason I disagree with you is because one is promoting and has a stage of like, hey, I am a compass of, morality, and he's gaining his bread, butter, his livelihood from that, right? And he's supposed to be somebody who is promoting ethical behavior, but then he's actually not. So I don't think that they're equal. That's one point. The other is that some of these situations that you're talking about, and I keep going back to the specific ones that you said about, like, in the United States that have happened. Again, I don't know the details of those situations, but like the mother said that I went to, like, yeah, even though the girls were technically Islamically shar'an baligha, right? Or
but that's just wrong.
Was touching them with, doing ruqya with oil, and touching them, and that's absolutely
utterly unacceptable. I mean, it is a crime, and these people should be punished by law. This is my point, just to clarify, that didn't even enter the parameter of my discussion. My discussion was, there's been a lot of scenarios, a lot of cases where...
So you're saying give the pass to the guy, the Imam.
No, I consider him wrong.
No. I'm talking about the scenario you just gave me, right? Like the little flirtation going on, whatever, and whatever it led to, right? You're saying give the pass, to the Imam because...
No, he's wrong. He's wrong. But she's also wrong. You see, I don't buy this thing that she was like a lamb or a sheep just because she, like lamb to a slaughter, because he was this vicious person who played his magical charm.
You have to remember, because it's unethical because they're in a position of supervision, right? So, for example, when whenever you, like, as a chaplain, right, I have signed, right, that a contract which says that I will never be able to have any kind of relationship with anyone who is considered under supervision.
Sure.
You know who that is? Everyone. That's like anyone and everyone at Northwestern. Okay? Why? Because anyone can come to me.
Sure.
Anyone can hold pastoral care hours with me. That goes from the president down to, like, you know, any student, right? Like, in terms of the hierarchy, so to speak, of the administration. So,
but are these conditions, these bylaws, are they, in all honesty, I know they are ethical, but are they not about commerce and money? Is this not about...
The project focuses on that as well.
Because
right?
I just want to
clarify.
clarify.
We need to start developing these kinds of... because where are those ethical guidelines? Maybe that's a good question.
I just wanted to add this caveat that, you see, companies have this, corporate world has this, that you're not allowed to have relationships with people within that corporate realm. But really, this is an issue of productivity. It's not an issue of ethics. It's not that it's unethical. It's because you're taking the boss's time. He's paying you for his time. Now, you, in essence, is this not about productivity and labor?
This is actually
capitalism,
an unethical issue.
No, they've made it. They've made it about ethics, but it's actually is this not, because in work there's nothing like, if I worked in this department and I happen to have a girlfriend in that department, ethically speaking, that's not immoral. The reason it's against the bylaws is because why would the boss be paying me to be messing about? Whilst it's about money, isn't it? Capitalism.
That's your reading of it. That's your reading of it, right? I mean, I don't know, like, that's your understanding of it. But what I'm sharing with you is that many institutions are lining themselves, like we have Title IX, for example, in this country. We have many other kind of policies that are shared across the country, and they're under the guidelines of social ethics. They're under
I know, but we have many things in ethics which are today claimed to be ethical, but the underlying factors are really just commercial. It's because it makes money. It's because, in essence, look, a lot of capitalism, the freedoms that have just come as a reaction to Marxism. To say, well, look, give them these rights so they can carry on working.
How does that not still apply then to... So what I'm trying to say is that many of the Muslim institutions, like the Imams who are running, you know, many of these centers, you know, they're literally, even like the basic guidelines, Shar'an, that there should be, you know, a man and a woman shouldn't be alone completely, right? Even those, right, rules are not being followed. And he's supposed to be the person of knowledge, right? He's supposed to be the person who actually practices that more. So yes, absolutely, I would hold him more responsible.
And I agree with you, by the way, on that. I think the Imam, it is utterly unacceptable to be using your position where you're meant to be teaching about Islam to be kind of trying to pull women. I 100% agree with that. My only disagreement was in saying that those women that he did engage with, or they did engage with, and this is there's been cases in the UK, obviously big celebrity cases in the US, everything, you guys do everything large, you see, you go out large. So, but I felt that a lot of those cases, the women were just willfully participating, but later on the back of the Me Too kind of project, they also started to claim abuse and say, well, actually, you know, when I think about it, I was actually being groomed. And you think, well, you're a grown adult. I mean, how the hell were you being groomed?
So you're saying you're assuming that you don't know if that happened, at what point that happened, right? You're assuming that.
I mean, I am assuming. I am assuming.
Right? There's a lot of.
But you're equally assuming that they're not.
See?
But you're equally assuming that they're not. We're all assuming. I'm just saying.
So when we talk about this topic, right, and really, actually, you know, it would be a good idea to talk to, you know, someone who specializes in the area of consent, particularly in the United States and maybe even in the UK, and actually hone in on that concept, right?
Because I think that's very important.
What you're actually talking about is even Shar'an, like, what is consent? Okay. At what point is consent shared in that relationship? And so what I'm telling you is that in the United States, consent stops the minute she says or he says it's no, right? Yeah. And so if the other person continues, right, that is abuse. That is defined as abuse.
I agree with that. I think in all of these
you can't
cases,
say, well, why is she crying about it now, right? Like that's actually, you know, I think it's like, I understand that you're
that I
trying
agree
to
with.
put
That I
a
agree
critical
with.
theory
We're in agreement with that. In most of these cases that I've seen, the woman, when, let's say this hypothetical person, when asked, would not say during the courting process, like when we were in a kind of informal relationship, that I was being forced. And I at some point said no. They wouldn't say this. What they would say is, in hindsight, I feel now he had me brainwashed. This is what they say. So the groomed is like for an adult who casually walks into a center and casually walks out.
Abu Layth, so you have to remember that there are experts of different kinds.
Of course.
The psychologists tell us, so you got to respect the psychologists, right, who are studying this, right?
I'm from psychology. I mean, my background's in psychology as well. But I mean, I totally agree.
Right. You know that, so when a person takes a pause and needs to reflect because of whatever trauma that they suffered, you can't blame them for taking that time, right? It's actually part of the trauma, right? It's the impact of the trauma on the brain of like trying to reassess what actually happened and process what actually happened. And what you're saying is, well, look, you just came out and you think that you just got, abused. Well, how did you think of that now? And how did you
so just to be clear, there's a difference between, let's say a woman was drunk, or she was slightly under the influence of something, or she was, let's say a woman was completely emotionally crying and doing all these things, and somebody came and just kind of took advantage of that situation. That's understandable. And she said, look, in the morning, let's say, or a few hours later, she said, you know what the hell, this person just took advantage of me, came into my house.
Emotional abuse is a category and you can't dismiss it, right?
I'm not dismissing that. I'm saying in these scenarios, these women do not claim that during that, let's say this courting process lasted for 6 months or a year. They do not claim during that process, I used to say no and he used to force himself. In most of these things that I've come across, they don't claim that. What they claim is at the end of it, when he moved on to somebody else.
Not in the cases I've seen.
Okay.
In the cases that I have seen, that's not true.
Right. They don't claim they don't claim to be raped.
If you're talking about
any
specific case of I don't know if you want to
let's
name
say
this
Osama
person,
Khannan, or there was Ustadha Osama Khannan, or there was a few cases. I mean, even here in the UK, and I'm condemning their action as well.
You're talking about Nauman Ali Khan, for example.
Yeah, let's say Nauman Ali Khan. The same thing. I'm condemning his actions. I'm condemning these people for doing that. But what I'm saying is that, what's being said about I was brainwashed. Don't you think that's a bit of a far-fetched, like, were you really brainwashed? Like, that's a bit of, like, come on.
So you have to, okay. When a person is expressing themselves, right, validating their feelings is because that's where they're coming from. You can't dictate what the other person is going to say. They're going to share with you what they believe happened to them. And I think that to honor that is part of the healing process.
Of course,
so
of course.
As much as you're saying, well, how could you have been brainwashed, all of that, like, you're not in that situation. Mm-hmm. So your brain is not actually going to respond in a similar way. Like,
but
you're looking at it from outside in. But isn't there a huge assumption here that there's an assumption that the man's brain is 100% in control and the woman's brain is not in control? Isn't this an assumption? How do we objectively verify this? So in the cases that you're talking about where there was flirtation, but there was actually no rape, right? Yeah. The point in all of this,
because we've had cases here, by the way, as well in the UK. There's been several cases. So, and I agree that this has become a bit of a universal phenomenon. So it's not just restricted to, let's say, Nauman Ali Khan or Osama Hassan. And by the way, I'm being very clear. I'm not justifying their actions, and I think I agree with you that if a person is on the pulpit, then he should honor the pulpit of the Prophet sallallahu alaihi wasallam, and he shouldn't misuse that to kind of. I mean, you know, when, like if a person thinks, look, I want to do something, he should just do that off his own back. He shouldn't use Islam as a tool to lure people, or let's say to be that kind of, oh, well, I agree with that. And that's why I do hold them to blame. But I simultaneously find it difficult to, this claim that, and many people, that look, the magical charm was so powerful that I was incapable of seeing
It's
right
not.
from
It's
wrong.
not just. It's not that. That's not all that they're saying, right? There's a lot. There's a lot that goes into this in terms of the perpetual lies, the insistence, the trying to skew the knowledge piece about this. There's a lot more that goes into this, and at the end of it, right? All I'm trying to say is, what would be like, what does the overall community need to learn from all of this, right? So it's one case is of the people who are in the pulpit, so to speak,
True.
right? Which I think we all agree with is like stop misusing that, right? True. I think we agree with
100%
that.
100% agree with that.
But I think the bigger question that I'm curious, like if viewers are also thinking about this, which is, what is the ethical or what are the ethical guidelines for relationships within the Islamic tradition, right? And or are we, using a Western model where like nobody owes each other anything really, right? Like where you can engage with someone in some kind of even physical, like if you're applying if that's the construct that you're working in, then you have to kind of like back up and recognize that within the Islamic tradition, we have parameters, right, put in place.
Of course.
And when those parameters, that those parameters actually apply to everyone, not just, somebody who's, so if a brother and, like an average Muslim guy and an average Muslim girl are having a relationship, the heart is still attached, right? Like you put yourself into that place. But many, people who go through these relationships where there's a breakup, it's like, oh, the other person will say, I don't owe you anything, at the end of it. And, what I actually have a problem with is the way in which so many young Muslims are not able to truly like find meaning and love like in a relationship because of the way in which it's kind of been reduced, right, to this idea of like even like casual sex, right? And so I think what comes out of all of this is starting to think about like, okay, like how do we talk in general about sex and relationships, because we don't, right? Like every time this becomes like a big
huge taboo.
Every time these things happen, I think part of the reason why everyone's like, oh my gosh, like hashtag this, hashtag that. Why? Because, or, they're talking about all these, cases. I think people need to like reflect that, number one, we need to give victims whatever, healing that they need. And this is, again, you could differ with me, Mufti Abu Layth. My opinion on this is that when someone who is going through whatever trauma that they are, or whatever crisis that they are, like my responsibility as a chaplain is to be present, to listen, to validate.
100% support
and
that.
I will always do that, right?
And I just want to be clear as well for the listeners, because somebody had said something, there was a comment as well about, look, the conversation being amazing, although they feel that this kind of a conversation for me is just something that would get me into trouble. Now, I personally, just to be clear, that look, I don't really care what kind of controversies my discussions bring me. I'm already as controversial as they get, as anybody can tell you. I'm sure even Ustadha was probably warned 100 times before coming online with me. But my point here was not in any way, and I keep saying this, it's not to take away from the suffering of those who claim trauma or anything like that, but it's to realign objectivity to a claim of criminality, that's all. What I'm trying to say is criminality, when we make claims of morality and not about feeling hurt. Look, like for example, I could go to the shop and I can't get, like right now there was panic buying and everything. I could be feeling incredibly hurt. Feeling hurt is true, it's genuine. I'm going through it, I'm experiencing it. and you can't deny me that, right? That's true. But at the same time, does that mean that there is an element of, for example, immorality, or where does the responsibility lie? Sometimes we take actions which cause us hurt as well. And I just feel that the problem is we're in a society where, you see, if we ask genuine questions, we, like earlier on you said about victim shaming, I feel that men, it's so difficult for them in this current Western culture to kind of be able to ask these questions in just a genuine conversation, because they will be shamed as like, oh, how dare you, kind of like, this is this is toxic masculinity, that's what it is, and this kind of stuff. So I feel that what this is doing is it's leading a lot of men, because they can't ask them, they're internalizing. And this then turns, unfortunately, either into a kind of imploding depression or into a rage. And I feel the best way is dialogue. It's just to be able to ask. And this is why I do believe, amongst many people, Ustadha, you are an excellent person to be having this dialogue with. Because one, you deal with trauma. Two, your specialism is spirituality. And three, you are also involved in the religious scene. You're actually, you network positive. You've got an amazing kind of like a working relationship with many of these imams. I think Mufti Kamani, you work very well with him, and so many other people who we both know that you work very well with, and there's so many. So this is the ideal place to really have these these kind of talks. And it's not too, I know some people, if they watch this and they feel, is Mufti just going in harsh against? I'm not. I'm just trying to ask the questions that many people are too afraid to ask, and I just trying to be real. That's all with them. But I do, and I feel that any person who is suffering, what you're doing is that is a gem of a service, really, because what somebody is subjectively experiencing, they need a healing process. But the issue was of culpability and responsibility. That's all. Yeah.
So, this is also systemic, right? Like, I mean, part of the conversation where people, so I get what you're saying, that there are genuine, men who have these like questions that they want to ask, and they want to have this conversation and they want to dialogue about this. But what I often hear from men is a very like, just an immediate critique of like, oh, well, why couldn't she leave the room? Why couldn't she do this? Or why couldn't it? And what I'm trying to say is that literally, if they're genuinely interested, I think it's important to first trying to understand, like, how do you support a person who is going through that trauma first, right? And one of those things is deeply understanding their situation. In many of these cases, we have not had that opportunity. So I want to recognize that there's lots of cases that were broadcasted on social media, but there was no transparency. So in essence, people were left with a lot of questions, right? Of like, okay, so because like you said, like, many Muslim men who would hear about this would say, yeah, that's not okay. Like, if there was abuse, that's not okay. Like, it's not only is it common sense, it raises a sense of urgency that this is absolutely not okay. When you see somebody who's poor on the street, right, and they're asking for money, and you say, well, here, like, most people, would not question, like, why is this person here? I mean, if you're a genuine person, right, you give them money, unless, of course, that there is a systemic, somebody's actually putting them on, there's parts of the world that it's actually better to, like Rasulullah said, like, give the person an axe, right? So that they can make a living for themselves, and not just, the fish for the day, so to speak. But you have to remember that some of this is, systemic. So like when a person is seeking help, it's trying to tell them and shame them and saying like, why do you want this money right now? I'm just trying to give you one possible example of trying to put this into some kind of, even though, I think they're kind of they're not exactly parallel, but it's this idea that a person who's vulnerable has, even like their psychological capacity to be able to share what's actually happened, and the way in which even like some physicians are looking, and neurosurgeons who are looking at brain patterns, right, of women who have been in a relationship where she no longer consented, but there was a push for it from, you know, the male side. Like, what does that do to her ability to then like even recollect herself, right? So all of that I think needs to be taken into consideration as you're having this conversation. I mean, so if it's okay,
yeah, of course.
I know that like I don't know who else has joined us. I want to be able to, you know.
I was just going to make a suggestion that I actually think one of the ways, a kind of remedy to this solution is to get a greater female participation in these sacred spaces, is to have more women in positions of power, to balance out. So I think like if we had more people like you, Ustadha, if we had more women that sat on the board of masajid, that sat in, first of all, from the very least, they participated in the masjid space to every dimension, to the teaching. If they want to teach, I mean, there's men and women available. That if they want to do counseling, there should be men and women available to deliver that. If in the board, even the president of a masjid, you know, they alternate. Why can't a woman be a president of a masjid? And I feel that would at least liberate. It would at least, because I do agree with you. The problem is you do have a lot of this kind of this culturalism where, especially from back home, you know, like to safeguard the man, people will just do, you know, like, oh, just shut up, you know, it's the man is the man at the end of the day. And this kind of, that approach, especially in certain parts of the world. So I feel, inshallah, if this is promoted, if more women do kind of qualify, they do, and then space is provided for them as well. They're not just shunned. Like, you know, they could be training, but then nobody's bloody giving them a space. I mean, if they are allowed onto these committees, they are allowed, then hopefully, inshallah, you know, less and less of this kind of, these kind of catastrophes can happen, inshallah. I mean, that's, I hope, I mean, Allahu A'lam what's in the future, but that's a hope I have. I don't know if you see things going on.
I don't know what it's like in the UK, but like here, alhamdulillah, like it's definitely more, you know, growing. More Muslim women are, mashallah, involved. They're actually at leadership positions in many of these organizations and getting things done, you know, alhamdulillah. I mean, you know,
women are much more functional at getting things done than men. I feel that anyway.
Yeah, I mean, you guys, I mean, I don't know about, you know, subhanallah, the rest of the UK
lazy as hell.
This, but, you know, the rest of the people watching this, but, you know, like, you guys are like, you know, like vampires. You guys come out at like the nighttime, you know, subhanallah.
With darkness we rise.
They say we alive in the nighttime. That's what my experience has been of a lot of the Muslims in the UK come out at the, you know, in the dark, really.
Out of curiosity, I mean, we'll wrap this up. I know you've been on. We've taken up so much of your time. I know you've got probably a million other things to get on with, and probably so many people try to reach you as well, especially since this is on your phone. So I mean, just as a curiosity, I know some people were asking. So what is, since I'm somebody so deemed as controversial anyway, what were some of the key concerns that people had when you told them you were coming on online with me? Was there any, or not really? There was none, or what? I'm curious to learn.
Well, I mean, I'll be honest. Like, you know, I think, you know, someone said like, oh, it's gonna get controversial. You know, so just be aware of that. Mm-hmm. And I was like, you know what? Alhamdulillah. Like, you know, I believe that we have to continue to be in conversation, right? Like, even if it's a topic that maybe of discomfort, you know, and so I agree with you on that part, that like, we have to be able to also listen, because that, like, when you start to shut the other person, right, completely, you lose the ability to understand like what's actually brewing under, even if you believe that it's wrong, it's something that's, you know, something that's, but I don't believe I would want to promote that. But at the same time, I think it's important to kind of continue to gauge like what's actually happening, what are people thinking, what are people feeling, right? I think that's important. So, yeah, that was one that,
Okay.
maybe controversial.
I
I
mean,
think another,
the controversial one
the
is true.
other concern was like, make sure, he's not single. And I was like, bro, mashallah, he's married, alhamdulillah.
Not another scandal. No, I'm joking. So, okay. I mean, I know, but to be fair, you guys haven't got it that bad. The whole sectarianism thing, alhamdulillah, it hasn't brewed to that level in the US. I hope it kind of dies a death in the UK as well, because it is nothing but nastiness, all this kind of sectarianism, and people, not, oh my God, that person's a deviant, don't talk to that person, and don't talk to this person, and, for God's sake, I mean, if we can't talk to people as grown adults, what can we do? But, people here have definitely benefited from you. They've enjoyed your company. I have. I mean, it's been incredible having this conversation, because I feel that it's difficult finding real, genuine people that you can be real with, and at the same time, even if something, there's a pickle, something is a bit controversial, but you can just discuss it like grown adults. So I really appreciate you having this conversation with us, Ustadha. If anybody does want to reach out to Ustadha, she is on Facebook. You are on Facebook as Tahera Ahmed. Are you? What other platforms would you advise people to reach out to you on, Ustadha?
Yeah, I'm on Facebook, social media, on Instagram as the Tahera Ahmed, because there's a bunch of other apparently Tahera Ahmeds. But yeah, Facebook.
One and only, people. That's it, Ustadha.
Yeah, so you can totally reach out to me. Again, this was an interesting conversation. I really appreciate it. And I know that especially during COVID-19, I'm sure many conversations have been specifically about this viral war, or the war against the virus. So this was kind of, something that took a break from that conversation to be able to talk about something that I think has been on the minds of a lot of people. I definitely want to,
I mean, and there was a lot more, the whole thing about, women wishing to study, and then what should they do, your experiences, what kind of career paths they could take, the importance of the Quran, of tilawah, the spiritual journey. I mean, and then obviously these things as well of what does this mean? What was this palaver? But it's been amazing. Shukran once again. People, you guys have been awesome, hanging out all this time, right? Really waiting up till being vampires like me. So guys, much love to you.
What time is it over there? It's like 2 a.m.
Well, no, it's gonna be 5 a.m.
Oh, wow.
Guys, I'm gonna put up my page. Do remember to like, share, subscribe. If you've got any issues, questions, do reach out to me. Likewise to the Ustadha. Take very good care of yourselves. Wassalamu alaikum wa rahmatullahi ta'ala wa barakatuh, people.